me. All right is right. Hi, Dave. This is Mindrolling. David Silver is with me. Raghu Markus. Hi, Dave. And this is the first Mindrolling podcast for 2020. It's also, of course, something special in that I wanted to do this with David because we started this whole thing together. And of course, as you all know, Ram Dass left us on December 22nd after appearing at the Maui Open Your Heart in Paradise retreat in December with Krishna Das and Jack Cornfield and Trudy Goodman and Mirabai Bush and myself and others, Duncan Trussell included. Robert Svoboda was the guest star of the thing, actually. He was fantastic. I don't know if you saw any of him, Dave, but worth it. Yeah, he's amazing. But it was where Ram Dass just literally to his last breath, he came to this thing. His body was just so skeletal and his energy completely depleted, but somehow he summons something from deep within himself, a will that I can only imagine that will is really just aligned with Maharaji's being. And that's the source of him being able to stay alive for 3 years after getting that massive stroke and being able to do what he's done for the last 15 years in Maui. So I thought I'd get together with David, and the two of us remembered that when soon after Ram Dass got to Maui and decided he was going to stay there, David and I were together there in the fall of 2015. And we had an idea to do a book.
2005.
Say that again? I'm sorry, 2005. Yeah, 2005. Yeah, and we had an idea to do a book, and the book was going to be around being honest with oneself, which is so emblematic of Ram Dass all through these years in terms of navigating the spiritual path. It cuts through so much BS that we tend to allow our minds to believe. So radical honesty. And so we had a whole chat with him over a couple of days, right? 2-3 days, Dave?
I think 2 or 3 days, yeah, because it's on my copy, there's, it's dated.
Yeah.
The book was going to be called The Habit of Honesty. And it rambled around, but we did, get into that heavily. And it was extremely gratifying to me, actually, because at that time, in 2005, 20 years, 30 years previous to that, even more than that, the first sort of section of Ram Dass's teachings that deeply changed me, and many other people, was his way of bringing you to incredible self-awareness, the best you could come to. And my conclusion, having read this, Raghu, in the last couple of days again, is that I don't know if I'd ever would have been able to see things somewhat more clearly if it weren't for him. I just don't think so, because of the sort of clear, compassionate articulation of his wisdom at that time. And since 1969, around then. So our concentration was on that, and the loving awareness and loving kindness transmissions were there, right? They were there, but this was more, our conversation with him was more about coming to honesty about your own predispositions. Mm. And I simply cannot think of another who did that as effectively and as compassionately as Ram does. It's just, I can't. I don't even want to. He's enough.
So one of the things that we did was we actually, I think you, David, picked out some excerpts from a particular a retreat that he did in 1989, Listening Heart. It's a fabulous series. And then, he commented, we commented on it, and reacted to it. So let me just read this excerpt because it's the core of what we were aiming for in that moment. Ram Dass says, and again, this is 89, pre-stroke, I learned an interesting thing. I learned that the more honest I was in a public space, the more other people felt freed by it. And I get more letters from people saying, thank you for your honesty, because it helped me so much to deal with mine. I don't feel at all. I mean, why would I want to keep it private? I have no shame about my life. Let's see, what am I? I am God. Let's start with that. I am God in form. I have the blessing which has a pathology in it as far as I'm concerned. Whenever I talk to people about Ram Dass, and we talk about his legacy nowadays, obviously, and how that's going to manifest going forward into the future, inevitably, being honest with oneself is central to what he transmitted. And just after he left, I remember writing a note that I put out publicly, just about what he gave. I said, I don't know where I'd be, just like you just said in another way earlier in this conversation. I don't know where I would be had I not met Ram Dass in this life. I can't imagine it, right? And what did he give us? The sense of course, the love, of course, the sense of family, satsang, the wisdom, the perspective, all of that. But because of that honesty, I mean, my first take on listening to him was, okay, it's okay. It's okay if I screw up. It's okay, these crazy ass thoughts that are going through my head and emotions and desires and all of it. I don't have to beat myself to death on a day-to-day basis. That was such a powerful thing that he transmitted because of his own self-honesty, and which he worked on throughout his life. I mean, in the last number of years, I think that's he still was. Of course, if you see the movie Becoming Nobody, and he talks about how he still screws up and all of that. So he was still quite aware and always looking deep inside to his motivational stuff. That is a tremendous transmission and part of the legacy.
Yeah, well put. There are many now who, in this time we live in, that write about similar things, from Eckhart Tolle to many others, and that's great. But what I remember exactly like you, Raghu, is that in those years, they were crazy times. They were crazy times. Given the atmosphere of the counterculture, which was liberating in and of itself, but had all kinds of contradictions within it. What Ram Dass did was bring it back home, away from sort of, even you might say at that point, mystical thinking, into a psychological entree, which he had every right to give because of his background, of course, because of the role that he eventually discarded. But he had all the technical knowledge about the psyche, but he went a million miles away from there, different galaxy, and gave us, it was such a gift. He gave us what you just said, the ability to dissolve guilt, but at the same time, it's brilliant because dissolve guilt, but at the same time, admit the thoughts that were flashing through your psyche that you would probably never say to anyone. And of course, when he first encountered Maharaji's omniscience, he became sort of petrified for a minute, because very few Westerners, if any, had experienced that ability to see into another human being and see what they were really all about.
Past, present, future.
Yes. And he gave us that in a way. I remember distinctly all the lectures I went to and all the personal conversations I had with him. You know, it wasn't done in this sort of haughty manner. There was none of that. It was like, okay, you know, yesterday I was thinking very badly about someone, you know, murderous thoughts. And I realized I saw them, and I realized I still had those murderous thoughts in me. I'm not quoting him exactly, but it's the kind of thing he did. And he says in this conversation that Raghu and I have, that the audience loved him because they felt like they were talking to themselves. That's a very profound thing that he said there. That you didn't think someone was lecturing on high about something you'd never attained. It was as if he was saying what you were thinking about your thinking. And that was so incredibly transformative for me. Because, you know, I came from England, stiff upper lip, don't admit anything, total denial, all of that. I wasn't the worst example of that, but I was from there. And hearing him just explode that without being destructive or full of anger or even, it wasn't really a critique. It was a way of looking at yourself which changed and helped your whole damned life. And I can never thank him enough for that. No, I actually can't. It just was overwhelmingly important to me and everyone I knew who came into contact with him. And even to this day, you know, I was on my run yesterday, and I thought I was sort of blankly, almost meditatively running, and then suddenly a whole avalanche of angry thoughts came crashing into my psyche. And the ability to see that I was having that avalanche and not to judge myself and not to feel guilty about it, but then at the same time, simultaneously to admit that I was having that matrix of thought forms. This stage, 50 years later, it was still around us that gave me the ability to go on running and dissolve them and make them into little schmoos up there that I could be friendly with and have a cup of tea, as he said, with. Instead of just going, oh, I'm a bastard. I am a hypocrite. I meditate, but I still don't like people. No, that could be the dynamic. But what he gave us, and what a gift this is. He gave us the ability to say, you got him. Okay, you don't like him, but don't make yourself hate yourself for it. Just notice them and then befriend them, have a cup of tea with them, and then let them go.
Do you have something you'd want to share out of from this dialogue that we had with Ramdas?
Yes, Raghu, I had quite a few things.
I wonder if we did this on our own, everybody, so we'll see how they jive.
Well,
what
said one of the techniques or words that he would use that has become part of our vocabulary is the word witness. And at one point during our conversation, he said, we introduce the witness, and the witness is the soul, and the soul has in it a pearl of God. Think about that expression, a pearl of God. It's an individual packaging, and we all have the same pearl. We all could look at the world with similar eyes, but the ego, the first plane of consciousness, is just too captivating. And communication from those things in us that aren't relevant on this plane are treated as static. Like meditation is getting rid of the static. A talk with God. So, if I talked on the third plane, which is the Atman, if you talk from that plane, everybody in the audience will get a feeling. Well, this is familiar because they have it in them too. And that's what I try to do. No, I don't try to do it. Here's the gift, Raghu.
Yeah.
We've all got it. Did we know we had it before we met him and others that, you know, that we can talk about via him? I'm not sure that I ever knew anything remotely like that. Remotely. I mean, you know, I just thought I'm thinking stuff and I'm bad, or I'm thinking stuff and I'm good, or I'm doing stuff and I'm clever. The idea of this pearl. What is a pearl? A pearl grows out of something in an oyster, right? It's not just there in the shell. It grows. And then if we're lucky, we find it, and it is indeed a pearl. We can put it around the neck of a beloved one. But it's not there unless you look for it, and it does not grow unless you nurture it. These are the mechanisms and dynamics that he gave us that are just incomparable.
And he, talking about that pearl, he would talk about when he came back and how he shared Maharaji when he wasn't supposed to. And I think I tell people, because it wasn't that long ago, I said, why did you do that? He told you not to talk about him. That's all you did when you first came back in 1968. And he said, I had a jewel and I had to share it. And then in our conversation, he says again, when you ask him, why did you do that? When he said, don't tell anybody about me. He said, so Ram Dass said, it's like I have a treasure and there are so many needful people. I can't not share it. And he said, Maharaji must have had a lot to do with that. Yeah, that's a wild understatement. At the end of the first visit, I asked him if I could come back, and he said in 2 years. And I said, you can't send me back into that, into the West, into that mire. And Ram Dass said, I'm not pure enough. There's so many desires being fanned. And Maharaji said, well, turn around. Can you, keep turning around. I got to look at you. Mm-hmm. And I did. And he said, I don't see any impurities. God, he did that once, like when I was there with Ram Dass. And he went through, Ram Dass was actually crying and saying, we're so impure. And, Maharaji said, what do you mean impure? I let you peel the potatoes, right? And everybody out there is going, wow, what kind of privilege is that? And the reality is, in a Hindu temple, the only people that are allowed in the kitchen to do anything are Brahmins. Westerners are considered untouchables, really. And so the fact that Maharaji would have people, us, go in there, I'm sure some of the Indians were looking askance at that and going, whoops. But he said, yeah, I let you peel the potatoes. You're not impure. And of course, that's somebody who's living in the undivided and only sees that perfection, right, inside you. So so between that going on, and then the other thing going on, which is the reflection of that purity, was so extraordinary that we couldn't help but notice the opposite that was going through our little noggins, right? Oh God, it was horrible. So that's why, we all would be around when Maharaji would say something like that. Oh, no, it can't be. We were convinced. We convinced ourselves that we were a mess. And to a great degree, of course, we were. I have something that's interesting that I found. This goes back to, I don't know how this came up, but it's pretty wonderful. So you were asking him, you say something about, obviously after the first encounter with Maharaji, you did this incredibly powerful stuff. You had a totally emotional reaction to it. What happened to you in the days following this revelatory experience is what you said. I went to KK's. I was sent to KK's. It was such a daze. I don't remember hardly anything because I was just whirling and crying and crying and crying and crying. Crying somehow took me to, oh my God, I'm home. That expression, by the way, Dave, that's exactly what every single person who was there had the same exact experience around that home thing. And to me, that's extrapolating that to what's been happening with Ram Dass over these last 15 years, I think is a really important thing, because he created that home in Maui, certainly with the retreats, in the retreats in Ojai, in the satsang that happens through the power of technology and the different things that happen that way. That home, that's the biggest thing, that home that he transferred that. And of course, he was doing it for a long time in the decades before the stroke. But the way he did it in Maui, and the way that he was much more who he was talking and pointing to after the stroke, which, talk about fierce grace, right? So he said, "Oh my God, I'm home. This is what I've always wanted. Somebody will understand me from inside out." Okay, that's part of the home, a being like this, understanding from inside out. Or in Hindi, it's in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, it's called Antaryami, knower of all hearts, knows past, present, future. KK talked to me about Maharaji, and I just surrendered to everything. I didn't consciously surrender, but I was surrendered to the whole scene. I didn't even feel there was a choice. It was so fully surrendered, which had not been in my consciousness before him, living like this, right? We just said that. You just said that before. None of this came into my consciousness until I met Ram Dass and other beings of this nature. I remember I had to get a passport thing dealt with, and I went to Delhi. It was so weird to stand in the American embassy after being with Maharaji. It was shocking. One of the temples in Kenchi where I was with Maharaji had a very tall orange cement Hanuman, and I would sit in front of that meditating. I would say, "What am I doing here? Look at my colleagues from Harvard. Look at it. He's worshiping a cement monkey." Now and then, Western thoughts would come about what I was doing, but then nothing. That's so great.
Yes. Yes. And that in itself is the teaching.
Yeah.
You asked him in the same session, what about people? Well, actually, I asked him, after the mushrooms and everything, when did the habit of honesty start with you? And he said, I think it started with him, his consciousness. And then you asked him, Raghu, what about people who haven't even had the luxury that we say of knowing about that presence? How do they bring that awareness? How do they bring that awareness? And he said to you and me, he said, I would say in their heart, not their mind, to experience the present moment. That'll do it. Stop doing. This is being. Be your awareness. Don't focus on this or that. And that will give you immediate access to the awareness. With Maharaj around, you can't be anything but honest. And so there you got the first kind of important building block coming from the guru, who has to speak to some extent in terms that we understand to begin with. And so did Ram Dass in translating that, which was honesty. You must be in front of God. You may not consciously be thinking you're in front of God, but what is it within you that makes you honest about yourself, not just about the external world and, I love Democrats, I hate Republicans. No, it's the honesty about what your psyche is telling you to do all the time. He's saying, well, around his initial contact, his very initial contacts with the guru were ones of cleansing, because he knew he was known. A knower of all hearts knew his heart right there, 1 foot from him. And that converted a flash of lightning in the dynamic of perpetual honesty, which of course is impossible, but it will come back. It will come back because of the power of the teacher and because of the power of the teacher's teacher, or guru. And here am I, back then and now. I mean, it's just a marvelous process, isn't it? You can be depressed, and then you actually have the mechanism within the brain to say, I am depressed. Why am I depressed? But I am depressed. So why? And then realize that it is just another moment, just another thought form baggage, and it is possible to overcome it without Zoloft, without 70 years of therapy. I'm sorry, I'm rather biased against that. So I've got nothing against people going into therapy, but I do think that
you're going to get letters on that one, buddy.
Well, send them to
send them to your psychiatrist is what I'm going to
do. But you can say, "Oh, it's just pop analysis." No, it was not, because when you're in an audience of 400 people and it's silent, listening to this man with a beard on the stage saying, being honest, is really it is the engine of evolution, personal evolution. He didn't say that, I'm saying that, but that's the way I would interpret it.
Hmm.
It's the only engine underneath it all that will stop you from entering roads that will lead you nowhere. Or even stop you from knowing that you're going down a road that will lead you nowhere. It just goes back and back and back and back until you get to that witness.
Hmm.
But who would have known about that witness without the impartation, if that's the word, or the imparting of that wisdom that comes from an ascended master who's only in touch with it all, not just with the environment and conditioning that you happen to have been brought up in. It's a miracle, really. It really is. It's a bigger city than anything, isn't it? Because it's converting, it's alchemy. It's the alchemy of the psyche.
Yeah.
And he did that continuously for 60 years at least. and here we are. And somebody wrote recently, since his passing, to me and said, it was a letter to me, and she said, now there's a more genuine, tangible bit of Ram Dass in me, now that he's gone for some reason.
Mm.
Because I know that I'm not going to, be relating to his body, but his transmission is potent within me now. And I value it even more now because I'm alone with it. And as we all are. Let me read another excerpt. Yeah, this is one I really love. He says, Ram Dass says, in all the years that I've been through psychoanalysis, I was a professor of psychology, I was a therapist. I took drugs for many years, profound experiences. I went to India, have a guru. I've studied meditation for 20 years, done a hatha yoga, had all kinds of Sufi and Hasidic and all that stuff intensively. I have never got rid of one neurosis yet. Not one. Not one neurosis has disappeared completely from the play. The only thing that has changed is that while there used to be these huge monsters that would take me over, oh my God, not that, as it would come at me. Now there are these little, like shmoo objects, these little sort of, there's sexual perversity. Come in, have tea. They are now these little friends. Again, he realized that about himself. But the reason he's a world teacher is because he allowed us into that perception that, and I think this is really important because most of us, have guilt. We come across a guru, we come across a teacher, we do meditation, we do all these, as he says, we hang out with Hasidim, we do it all because we're interested in the spirit and we're interested in the transcendental and the mystical and the love that encircles all of this. And yeah, we still have neuroses. What he did in that little comment, which I'm sure he said 500 times in the lectures, was don't think that just because I'm telling you this, that you'll walk out tonight and go home to your girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or whatever and say, I don't have any neuroses anymore. I went to Ram Dass. He told me how to get rid of them. He's the greatest therapist on earth. I'm pure. I'm clean. I'll never have that neurotic response again to you. He says, that's not true. Mm. Neurosis doesn't go away. Your attachment and reliance upon the easy sort of running through you of a neurosis will lessen. And you'll be able to see it. It goes back to that whole thing about you'll be able to see who you are presently, what this incarnation is made of, the clay that it is made of. And you may see stuff that you don't like, but you will have the ability after these teachings to look at them and go, there it goes again. I'm judging that guy because I don't like his shirt. Stupid shit. Mm-hmm. And then much more profoundly disturbing stuff. Like, why am I alive? What have I done? I haven't achieved anything. My relationships suck. My apartment's a mess. He allows you to both think the thought and in a way unthink the thought, just by thinking that you're having the neurosis and being able to observe yourself without paying $250 per session. Writing letters.
Yep. Send them today.
You love your therapist. I have so many friends who love that therapist. I love my ancient frayed copy of Be Here Now.
So do many. So do many. So in the process of looking through this document, which is the transcripts from those the interview that we did with him back in 2005, I was kind of looking for, maybe if he said something around death and dying, and it would be a poignant moment to take a look at that. And I did find something, and it's about a psychedelic trip that he had. So I thought that's interesting. I mean, we didn't often talk about in detail in some ways, in a couple of different instances. But here he goes. I was in Mexico in the ocean after an all-night LSD session, and there was a very wild surf. And I realized that if I went forward into the surf, since I couldn't tell the difference between up and down, I would probably drown. I stood there feeling all those forces upon me, and I realized I got this experience of imagining going to the surf and being underwater, and that feeling of drowning, and then shifting, and then a whole new balance in relation to nature. And then I'm a bit of floating something on the water, and then everything changes, and then there are moments in other people's minds when they say, "Oh, Richard, remember him? He died in the ocean in Mexico." And then there's all these little flickers, and everything quiets down, and then there's a new balance in the universe. And it was just a little shift from that balance into this one. In one, I am somebody doing something, and in the next, I am part of the ocean, stuffed like a piece of seaweed, and my consciousness has moved into some other plane. And once I had gotten out of the anxiety about it, it was just a shift, a metamorphosis of balance. I love that, right? We got to write that. A metamorphosis of balance. That's so great. It's just like a tree falling and then rotting and then providing nurturing for everything else in the forest and going on. And the tree isn't upset about its change of state. And I began to see that's the process of death, seeing transformation of energy. And the deepest fear, of course, is the death. It's the extinction of that fragile little thing that we created in the first place, right? That fragile little thing, Mimi. Because once you get back into the mystical root being, your true self, it doesn't die because it wasn't born. It just is. So there's always a place that is not afraid, and that is what one works to find in oneself. And I know, after being with Ram Dass all these years, and particularly about being with him, in the last few years, I mean, since he's on Maui in the last 15 years, spending a lot of time with him. But more recently, I know that uh, as he said in Becoming Nobody, when Jamie said, "So are you looking forward to dying?" He said, "I'm not looking forward to dying. I'm looking forward to what happens after you die." And he was very much living that. It wasn't a fear place whatsoever. Mirabai Bush did a wonderful book with him called Walking Each Other Home, which was really a dialogue about love and death and grief. And I would highly recommend people to pick that up because it has so much in there of what Ram Dass is, aside from all of the things he said about this, and kind of like we did, Dave. She did the same thing. She used different passages, excerpts from talks before his stroke, and then he would kind of extemporize around that. Um, it's really quite great. So there's one other thing around. I just think that's a fantastic thing from him around death. There's a famous story. Now, it may be that many people have not heard it, and if you have, it's worth hearing again. It's a story of Ram Dass talks about a young teenager from the Lower East Side came to me in Franklin, New Hampshire, and said he wanted to get some pointers from me on Hatha Yoga. I was teaching Hatha Yoga then. Now, he was much farther along than I was in Hatha. His father was a Russian scientist that came over, and they had oodles of money. They had homes in New Hampshire and Arizona. He said he was going to go to a cave that was on their Arizona property. I saw him once a month. He called me from Arizona to say he was well, and then I didn't hear from him. Well, he went into the cave, and then one day his mother shows up, and she says to me, "My son achieved Mahasamadhi," which means final enlightenment, the highest samadhi. She kind of looked like a society woman. And I said, "Oh, he did?" She asked, "Do you know anybody who could tell me whether he reached Mahasamadhi?" I said that I did, my guru. She sent me a high school graduation picture of Tony, her son. It was uh, his brother came to see me and says, "I got to tell you something." This is before he went back to India the second time. I might as well tell you, I've got to tell somebody. I visited my brother and we did LSD. And he used some of his breath exercises while tripping. Blood came out of his nose down the whole wall. And so I go to India and see Maharaji, and I remembered I had a picture of Tony in my wallet. So I show the picture to Maharaji, and Maharaji says, "He's dead." So Ram Dass said nothing about this whatsoever to Maharaji, right? And then this, Tony, in a letter to his mother, said, just before he died, "You needn't be afraid, mother. I'm going to be looking after you. I'll be with Maharaji. I'll be with Jesus and Buddha." And so this is something Ram Dass, remembered as he handed this over to Maharaji. Maharaji then closed his eyes after he saw the picture and said, "He's dead." And he started to repeat, "His mother should not worry. His mother should not worry. He's all right. He's looking over her. He's with me." And so I said, "But he died because of the medicine, the LSD. Doesn't make it." Maharaji said, "It does not make any difference. He was in Mahasamadhi." Like, okay, we don't know nothing about nothing. You imagine something like this? I mean, it's a horrible thing. This kid was 20 odd years old. Ram Dass said the kid was a serious yogi. I think the basic shift is identification with the separateness and then into the total all. When you are separate, there are forces around you, hurricanes of emotions and thoughts. But when we have finished identifying with separateness, there's no fear. It's just that one little thing. And this is like a star up there amongst the Milky Way. The identification with soul frees people from the fear of death. That he, so, you know, that was sort of, I think, David, the beginning of the development in Ram Dass of his whole thing around loving awareness. The identification from the flesh. He would always talk about go from your ego mind into the center of your chest, spiritual heart, and breathe in and out and repeating, "I am loving awareness." So that moves that identity. That's probably the most powerful teaching that that he shared with us in these last years of his life, for sure. And I quoted to him, "Fearlessness is developed by an open, warm heart," because other than, of course, the honesty that we've been talking about, also the allowing of the heart to blossom, and unconditional love for oneself and others blossoms. Courage or fearlessness is an essential part of us being able to navigate the minefields of of the spiritual path. And Ram Dass said, "See, it's the same thing, because a warm heart means by osmosis. It ties you to the environment, to the to the lost in love, and it brings you to the all identification. Love brings us to the one, and that's my love for Maharaji, and that's what he shared, and that became what he first experienced with Maharaji. He created that home around his love for Maharaji. That is he. In the end, I would talk to him, and we would actually say, "Do you want to keep going here? Your body, you got so much pain and so many things wrong with it, and so on and so forth." And he couldn't stand the idea of not being here for people, and that just powered him through everything. You know, I mean, it's extraordinary. It really is.
Oh, yes. It's extraordinary. Because how many people in your life do you encounter who could even go there to these things that you just talked about? I mean, yes, you can analogize. I was watching on Christmas Day. I decided to watch The Greatest Story Ever Told. I sort of watch some movie about Jesus every Christmas. That's all I do.
Really?
And there's a moment when he's first with the disciples, and one of them says to him, I don't remember who, maybe it was Peter, I'm not sure, said to him, "A thief just stole my coat." And Jesus sort of goes, "Oh, good. That's good. What do you mean it's good? I'm cold. And he took my coat." And Jesus said, "Well, what do you want me to say?" He said, "Well, I'm angry." He said, "Don't be angry. Give him your shirt. He needs it. He wants it. He's suffering. Why don't you give him your jacket too? I love him. And don't worry, you'll be fine. What's your big problem with this, Pete?" Or whoever it was, And he insisted on it, and the guy got angrier in the film. Of course, we don't know. But there's elements of, I'm sure, what really happened, where he taught his disciples, your conventional ideas of right and wrong, of robbery, of all of these things, they may have truth on one level. If someone steals your house, you're cold, you're out in the open, you get angry. But just go further and find that heart place and understand that the suffering around you is immense, and that if you really want to help, you will help that rather than only account for your own suffering. And, I'm not saying that Ram Dass was Jesus, but he certainly propelled us to understand that all the abstruse teachings in the world, from Dzogchen to Hasidim to the Torah, whatever, cannot do it unless you're not separate. That the separateness, as you put it, that little thing, the separateness causes us to have fear, particularly of death. And the more you hold on to things, I remember my car was stolen from the same place twice over 2 years. It was. And I remember the deep rage I had the second time.
Okay.
Oh my car. Yeah, on the same, wait a minute, it's worse. It was on the same day, July 4th, 2 years running. Somebody stole my car. And I remember the gamut of emotions when I had to borrow a car to go to the police place to see if it was there. The gamut of emotions driving up to Queens, to this hideous place, this sort of roadrunner, this sort of Mad Max type of pound with these cars in it. But then when I saw my car, I was so relieved, and I thought, who am I? that I'm happy or sad because I have my car or I don't have my car. I remember being very, and that was tied to somehow to the line that came through from Maharaji through Ram Dass and others to me, saying, stop, stop being so self-concerned, self-absorbed, owning everything, wanting to own everything. He says in this conversation, Raghu, remember, he says, I'm not even happy about having this nice house. You know why? Because it's a somebody house. You're a somebody if you've got a house like this. I don't want to be a somebody. I don't want that. And he wasn't being, sophist. He was saying, no, this doesn't help having a great house. That doesn't help me get rid of my attachments to it. I mean, non-attached to the house, but I don't really need the house. And then it's that pure honesty that everything that was milling around in that brilliant mind, brilliant, incandescent mind, still.
Yeah. Do you remember reading through this thing? And it reminded me, of course, because I was there. But when Ram Dass first got to Maui and he was sick in the hospital, it was the end of 2004, and I came over with a friend, and we got him out of the hospital and got him into a house, and then eventually got him that house that he was just referring to with you. But we were talking to him about how everything was stripped away. First of all, he gave everything away. He gave all his royalties away. I mean, can you imagine Be Here Now book royalties he gave away? Do you have, I mean, it's 6 figures a year or something for a long time. Okay. So there he was. And of course, this famous story where Wayne Dyer came along and he sat with us and sat with Ram Dass. And then I walked out of the house with him and he said, well, how can I help? And I said, well, things are real tight for Ram Dass in terms of money. He can't travel anymore and teach and, lecture and all that. So he said, well, let me think about it. And the next day he came back with the idea of putting a letter out to his millions of followers and asking them, look how much this man has helped us. Now we can help him. So here's what Ram Dass said about that. Wayne's letter stripped me. He said to his millions of people on his mailing list, poor Ram Dass, no house. I had cultivated my relationship with money and power, and that the idea that 3 million people are thinking of me as this homeless indigent, that left me with a new take of myself. And you said, well, so even though it was embarrassing, he did you a big favor. Yeah, he did me a big favor. Yeah, no question about that. He did it out of love, and I received it as a favor. But I did have the moment of, oh my God, what's a Jewish boy doing going broke? No. And you said, in effect, he ruined a role for you. And Ram Dass said to you, yeah, he ruined a role. Thank God for that. Huh? It reminded me also, because we are centered here around this whole concept of being truthful with oneself. Let me just find this. Oh, here. This is something that you played a tape for him. It just played the audio. Which was pre-stroke. Just starting to appreciate yourself, appreciate your humanity. I'm Ram Dass, and I've worked on myself, and I'm supposed to be equanimous, loving, present, clear, compassionate, accepting. Oftentimes, I get tired. I'm angry. I'm petulant. I'm closed down. Now, for a long time, I would get into those states and I would feel really embarrassed because that isn't who Ram Dass is supposed to be. So I would appear like I was warm and charming, equanimous, compassionate, and there was deviousness and deception involved. And then I realized that that's bad business because that cuts us off from each other. And I had to risk my truth. Okay, that goes back to me when we just talked about fearlessness. He risked his truth. I had to risk being human with other people and realize that what we offer each other is our truth. And our truth includes all of our stuff. And the first thing I had to do was accept my own truth. That's very powerful words, David. and really an advisal for all of us to become more vulnerable and risk and have a little bit of fearlessness about it's going to be okay. We are all indeed so interconnected that we can never get away from that. Of course, the mind doesn't quite allow that because we believe in the thoughts we have of separateness. So it becomes a difficult situation. But yeah, risk truth. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that connects directly with the present moment. That you want to ruin the present moment is all you've got. And if you're going to lie about yourself or lie about anything, and know you're doing it, you are in fact ruining that moment. Certainly for the person next to you or the assembled 500 people that you're talking to, he was very conscious of the audience. It wasn't that he went up there and then just was himself, and if you got bits of it, that was fine. He looked at that silent room, which was always silent when he was talking. You know, it wasn't like people were milling around or chatting to each other or whatever. I remember those rooms. I remember them very well. And how content everyone was, drinking in every word he said, not in as if he were on a throne. On the contrary, as if he were sitting next to you. And that is true genius of the deepest kind. It's not artistic genius or psychological genius or political. It's getting right to the heart of the matter. I mean, previous to him, I'd studied Wilhelm Reich. In fact, the postgraduate degree I did at University in England was about Wilhelm Reich and its effect upon the novels of Saul Bellow. That was my intellectual place at that time. But Reich taught me, if anything, from his books, about the armor. It was the word he used constantly. The armor is around our heart. And that was great. And I learned a lot at the age of 20 about that and so on. But Ram Dass took that much further because he individuated it to you, that person in that audience, in that room at that time, that you were lucky enough to be in his presence without idolatry. Because he scorned idolatry. He scorned it. He didn't want that. He knew people kind of idolized him and thought he was like shit, you know. And he was. But he didn't make that the gestalt of his transmission, which is extremely important to me personally. You know, that I don't love it when somebody, be it a rock star or a teacher or a friend or, you know, is suddenly on a throne educating you. What good the hell is that going to do? Yeah, you can learn facts and you can learn stuff, but it's when that person is empathizing with you so strongly that he or she can look at you and know that you need maybe this little nugget of something he's learned about himself from his guru. And it's not to be slighted, you know, it's not like learning from your high school teacher. I'm not putting high school teachers down in any way, it's older. But you know that the wisdom he imparted to you in this casual, humorous, totally Western way on a stage, sitting there in his jeans, stroking his beard, you knew that that was coming from that knower of all hearts. Ergo, incredibly valuable, forever. It cannot be overestimated. It simply cannot. What a gift. Oh, I mean, this is all very... I find it impossible to be cynical about Ram Dass because of the amount, the actual quantum of wisdom that I was lucky enough to...
And honest self-reflection. Okay. Everybody got that. And so there was no way in which Ram Dass was ever perceived as higher than thou.
Right.
It just never happened. And he kept that at the core of everything. Absolutely kept it at the core of everything. There's one last thing. It was the absolute end, David, of this conversation with him. And I think it really relates to where he was at in the days. The days preceding, the days and weeks preceding his leaving. And I think it's really important. So I was talking to him about his feelings about Maharaji. And I'm saying to him, you know, to me, I always related with him as like nobody's home. There isn't a somebody, a relational somebody that's home. Okay. And Ramdas said, well, Maharaji's a companion. I kid about him. I say he's my imaginary friend. When I say my life is my subject matter, it's plaster to him. How do you like that one? 10 years ago, I had in my head, if I could only live in Maui, and here I am, and people are giving me money. This is a nice house, close friends all around me. I have no real relatives, so nobody has to take care of me except Maharaji. And the people he has sent, he's put me in a very nice position for these last 75 years, 4 years. My experiences, my life are the content of our discussion. In other words, him in my life is the deepest wisdom, the deepest compassion and love and emptiness. Emptiness inside. It's interesting. The outer shell, the body and personality, that was the vehicle for me to draw into this silent emptiness that he represents. His body. I see a body and a personality, and because I'm a people person, I related to him. At a certain stage, you get off on the pictures, and then, they don't do it so much. The picture isn't the essence. And the essence is in me and him. And I see him and all this superstructure. And in the middle of his belly, I see emptiness. The last time I saw Maharaji, he was on his porch, on his tucket. I was down by the Shiva temple, going out to the bridge, and he was sitting just like Shiva, looking up. And I saw that emptiness. It's the essence of Shiva. I can't tell you for me how well that he expressed something that I think all of us who met that being would recognize, that Shiva-like embodiment. Uh, it just encompasses everything. It encompasses what Ram Dass used to talk about when he would tell the story of him wanting to go with his Volkswagen bus in India, where there was a war going on with Pakistan. They wanted to go to Bangladesh and help people, and Maharaji, discouraged him from doing that and said, "Ram Dass, can you not see it's all perfect?" And then we'd have these dialogues in Maui on stage and go, and Ram Dass would go, "Of course, I can't say that because I don't know that. He said that."
Mm.
And there's a huge ass difference. But we would see that because we would see the Shiva, and we would see the nature of emptiness in action. It was full of love. It was full of unconditional love. And to understand that Ram Dass went out in just those few weeks ago, and he went out into that emptiness that he so well recognized, that is full of love, that Bob Thurman calls the womb of bliss, right? And I have no doubt whatsoever that Ram Dass fully embraced. And the way that he surrendered when he first met Maharaji, we read that little excerpt. He said it was a surrender, and he has said this before, it was a surrender without surrender. And that's how he went into this. Of course, this is all also kind of, we can all intellectualize our loss that way. But Ram Dass, because the human loss is, very real. But Ram Dass, another teaching was, as humans, we can live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time. So yes, we have this grief. Yes, we are human. and we allow it to be, at the same time knowing Ram Dass was fully ready to go into the mystery. I'm only hoping, Dave, that he'll somehow get back a report about what really happens beyond it, beyond the initial bardo. Because the initial bardo, to me, like when you actually leave, I know, and this is in our case, Neem Karoli Baba, that blanket is right there, and we just go into those folds. Of course, Buddha, Christ, Mohammed, whoever it may be, to anyone, Karmapa, Dalai Lama, whoever it may be, they they gather you up into their folds, and then the fear evaporates in terms of moving through the different stages of consciousness that one goes through, that is well described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So I do know that he was completely ready, Ram Dass. Anything else to add on your side, Dave?
You know, ironically, Timothy Leary said to me in 96, whenever it was, he said, I don't know why people are so upset about death. I'm about to die. He had about a month left at that point. He said, I'm about to die. He said, I'm excited. What could be more interesting than being an explorer? And I'm dying, literally dying to explore this. And when he said it to me, I have it on film. The look in his eye was as enlightened as anything Tim ever was. It's ironic that I'm mentioning him around Ram Dass, these two gentlemen who actually transmitted very different things. At the end, they were embracing mortality in a way that helps us all.
Yeah, absolutely. As Krishna Das closes his concerts, I think you might remember how he talks about, without these beings who walked before us, where would we be? It's through these beings who walk before us that we can walk on the path. And we're pretty fortunate, everybody. And even all those of us out there that are listening now that never met Ram Dass, not much really that which he represents, which I know comes from that source called Neem Karoli Baba, which is just the source of the one, right? Is available to anybody. But certainly, and just to let everybody know before we get off, we are, and we're going to be putting a note out shortly about what our plans are going forward to continue Ram Dass's legacy, Neem Karoli Baba's legacy, and the legacy of all the teachers that we work with, and the expression of most important to everybody is satsang, is community, is sangha, and gathering together. And we have a lot of great ideas for different initiatives going forward, which we're, as I say, we'll be announcing in the next week or so. So thanks, Dave, for joining me. I really appreciate it. Of course, this is I knew Ram Dass was getting to the point where it would have been difficult to go on much further, and in that way, because of the pain and so on, it was that freedom from that is a wonderful thing, and the loss, of course, is a terrible thing. But I didn't think I'd be doing this podcast with you in the first week of January 2020, but here we are, and thank you, David.
Well, thank you. I'm very moved by being even asked.
All right, everybody, we're on the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and you /Mindrolling, and you can see the show notes and click into, if you want to watch the video, which we have up on YouTube, you can do that. And just gee, sign up at the Be Here Now Network email to see what other podcasts and other events that we have coming up through that network, and also ramdas.org, because we have a lot going on. And I do want to mention that on January 22nd, we're going to have a moment of being here now in tribute to Ram Dass, featuring Mirabai Bush and Krishna Das, and just some silent loving awareness meditation. So that's something, just go to, put your email in at ramdas.org, particularly to get notice of that, and notice of other things that we are doing. So thank you. We shall see you next week on Mindrolling.